Hi everyone, I'm Luke Hector and this is The Broken Meeple, a show where I devote my time to ranting and raving about board games, but usually more the latter. When you were having a bad day at school, or in my case having a bad day at work, you wanted to come home and enjoy some good old video games. Well, Video Game Champion's basically all about that. You are supposedly a kid trying to play all the latest video game releases, but that involves having to beg your parents for money, find magazines with cheat codes, and obviously get in time to get the rentals from the shop before your mates do. That is essentially this game's gimmick, trying to capitalize very heavily on this theme, while hopefully giving us a pretty decent game. Now, this wouldn't be the first game to try and capitalize on a theme very heavily. Pursuit of Happiness has done that, other IPs where they bring in something like Warhammer or Arkham, they'll do what they can in order to utilize a theme, but you still got to have a solid foundation underneath. And yes, this is definitely ticking the boxes in terms of my nostalgia, because I have grown up from, like late 80s and early 90s with the whole, what do we have? We had Sinclair Spectrum, moving on to the Super Nintendo, then I had a Mega Drive, my brother had a Super Nintendo, then I eventually had a Dreamcast, and I actually quite enjoyed a lot of games on the Dreamcast. It didn't exactly do well as a console, but I liked the Dreamcast. And then after that, I don't think I played many consoles. I played like some GameCube stuff at university with some mates, but after that, and certainly during that period, I then migrated more onto the PC, like Windows 95 era, when you had like Navigator to get around your desktop and that. The old games like Descent that I used to play religiously, stuff like that. So I have gone down the whole nostalgia route with this. But is this game good enough to, keep me wanting to bring it to the table, or is it purely theme and no substance?
That's like a baby's toy.
Even though this has a heavy, strong theme, the aim of the game is still victory points, and you are doing this by playing through 5 rounds with 3 turns each, followed by a weekend phase in each round. And the idea is that on each turn, you are trying to grab these various little joypad controller tiles. They're numbered and they're coloured. These are used in order to play the different video games, which all have a criteria based on numbers and colours. So sets of numbers, sets of colours, or ascending order, that kind of thing. But during your turn, you basically choose one of the tiles in the grid. This is a very small scale grid compared to normal. You take the tile and then you do one of the 2 actions in the row or column that you took this tile from. Similar games that have used this mechanic include Automania on my shelf, actually. They did something very similar. But with these actions, you are collecting money off your parents, you're doing your chores in order to pay them back effectively via IOUs, you're collecting more of these joypad tiles, maybe swapping them around, taking more from the bag, or you're actually renting or potentially buying the video game. So you can rent them, which means you get to use them for the round, but then you have to rent them again. Or if you've got a lot of money, you can effectively get a present from your parents to have them buy a game for you so that it's in your permanent stash. On top of that, you can do other little things like collect board game magazines, which these magazines basically help you play the video games better via cheat codes. I mean, who remembers those days where you used to get like a CD full of demos and random mods on a PC Gamer magazine or something? Come on, I remember those days. But essentially what happens is that after each turn, you are trying to play the various games. So for example, the criteria might be to have 5 of the same number. It might be to have 5 of the same color. It could be having 3 in a row of the same color. It could just simply be to have, a pair of one thing and a pair of another. They've all got this criteria. But each turn you're allowed to play these games. And it's essentially a case that you do as much as you can. You can either do it in one go, play the entire game one off, or you can do it turn by turn. So the first time you do it, you go, well, you know what? I'm just going to do part of the combination. And then you put a token on it to say you've played it. And then when you come to do it again, the fact that you've played it makes it easier to do the next time round. You can only do it 2 times. You can't keep practicing and practicing and practicing. You only get so good at games. But it represents that whole thing of, I couldn't beat the game right now. I'll have a little practice, play a few levels right now. Next time, I'm ready to beat it. It's that whole shtick. When you complete these video games, you'll score victory points. You can collect sets for various objectives, like play 3 different sport games, play 1 of each, complete 3 of each, that sort of thing. And that's kind of the gist of the game. You're basically playing through 5 rounds with the same format of 3 choices from the grid of joystick cons and, doing the actions, as well as a weekend phase of being able to rent and play more games. You repeat this for 5 rounds. And then you get to total up some points. You've got diversification for playing lots of different games, like just playing them, not even completing them. You've got all the ones that you have completed that are worth points. You've then got the objectives that you hopefully achieve during the game. And for the most part, that is the way you score. So most victory points at the end wins. What more do you need?
Something you're doing?
So certainly if you are familiar with this whole old school era of playing video games and getting magazines and asking your parents for money, pocket money to buy more games, or even just the days of Blockbuster Video where you could actually go and rent movies as well as video games to an extent, then certainly the theme is going to come out fairly strongly here. Now that's not to say that, the mechanics per se represent the whole plane of games, but you do have a lot of the aesthetics that make you think about this thing. It is kind of similar to the Pursuit of Happiness. Both have got aspects to them where the mechanics make sense. This whole idea of, right, well, I've got money from the parents to buy a game, but now I have to do chores for them in order to pay them back, that kind of thing. And Pursuit has similar things with the whole, you can't have a job and a relationship until you're past your teenage age, and when you do too many projects at once it stresses you out. All these sort of things come into play, and so the theme is there. In terms of its mechanics, it's quite a light game. It's not a gateway game for sure, though. Do not think you're going to teach this to brand new players. It's got a few moving parts that you do need to keep tabs on, but it's not heavy by any means. We're probably talking on the same weight level as something like, say, Wingspan, kind of that. Light, but not too light. With this one, you do at least get a decent reference aid with scoring on the back, and the iconography is pretty decent to help remind you of the game, and the rules themselves are not particularly complex. I mean, the rulebook has got a lot of picture examples, it's a fairly straightforward game to follow. The only bit that is a little bit weird is that the section where it talks about, playing games and doing it as a kind of as a weekend action or something, it's not worded very well in here. You might just need to take a couple of moments to read it over, just to make certain you fully get it. I even had to ask the question on BGG. I think my thread is still on there, so by all means search for it. So it's not a bad rule book, it's just not perfect. But yeah, you should be able to play the game reasonably well after reading it. Now, the game plays relatively smoothly, but I wouldn't say it was necessarily the shortest game either, because it says 50 to 90 minutes on the box, and I kind of get the impression that this really ought to have been like a 60-minute game max, because there's not a huge amount that you're doing in there. I mean, you basically take a tile, do one of two actions, of which the actions are variable in each game, so there is a little bit of variety there, but that's really the only sense of variety the game has. But what you're doing is very simplistic, and you're only doing 3 turns, plus the weekend phase. You're only effectively doing 15 turns plus some weekend phases before the game is over, and yet 90 minutes, which this will easily go to when you're playing this with 4 players. I mean, you can play this with 5 players. Don't. Seriously, do not. I mean, 5 players is way too long. Even 4 is going to take you to that 90-minute mark. It can just drag out and maybe overstay its welcome a little bit. It is also one hell of a table hog. I mean, this thing takes up a decent amount of space. This is a small bit of the grid, okay? This grid is a lot bigger, but then you've also got to have space for these magazine cards. You've then got to have space for, 3 of these giant tarot-sized cards for what you can buy as a gift. You've then got to have the rest of them all laid out in this massive display that reveal as the game goes on for the rentals. By the time you've set this up for even 3 players, let alone 4 or 5, your small table that you may have ain't big enough to house this game. You need a pretty decent sized table, and even then you're going to be squeezing everything around. It kind of reminded me of when I played Fox Experiment, if you remember that one. Fox Experiment looked to be quite a light game, shouldn't take up too much space, and then by the time you set that thing up and got all the dice around, it was an absolute mess on the table. This one kind of has a similar thing to that, although thankfully not quite as bad. You then get one more mechanic that I haven't mentioned yet, which is almost kind of like the game's way of just going maybe that little bit too far, which is these password sheets. During the game, you essentially have all these different colored gems on the various games that you can play, and whenever you collect a gem, whether it's the normal or the asymmetric side, you place the gems on this card, and when you fill up rows and columns, you get points and or special bonuses. I mean, that's literally all it is. It's nice to get, it's a nice rewarding feel to get bonuses, but your ability to actually get what you really want off those password charts is pretty much dependent entirely on what gem happens to be on what game when you play it, because you can't really aim for those as a priority. You need to aim for the games you want to play. If I need to play one of each category of game, the fact that they don't have the colored gems I want, I'm sorry, I can't really do much about it. So whether you trigger a lot off this thing or not is kind of random, really. But you're really mainly going after these games because of A, the category, B, how easy it is to do the thing at the bottom, and C, how many victory, also what difficulty the game is, 1, 2, or 3, because these objectives, are keyed off the different types of games, how hard they are, whether you're playing them or not, whether you're completing them or not, that sort of thing. Scoring wise, I have found that the balance is a little bit off though as well, because we've played a fair few games of this, and one sort of consensus, like continuous thing tends to happen. You've got 5 different main ways you score in this game. You've got diversification of how many games you played, period. You've got a podium spot for, gems and how many you've played, so like a first place bonus. You've got the password chart if you've managed to get enough points from here. And then you've got the objectives as well as the completed games that you've actually managed to do by the end of the day. Clearly, in order to win this game, you pretty much need to focus on these and the objectives, because these will score you the vast majority of your points. You can get, 6 points, 8 points, 4 points, for various bits in those first 3. I mean, if you've managed to get, more than 10 points on your password sheet, you've either got a very specific password sheet or you have done nothing but focus on that, in which case you've probably done it to the extent of failing at other aspects. But the differential with the points is really minor. I mean, check this one out. The first 3 categories, right? We've got 646, 848, 436. The differential is pretty minor, especially when you realise that the winning player probably has about 85 points by the end of the game, in which case, anywhere between like 60 and 85 points, so 1-2 point differential doesn't make a lot of difference. But then suddenly it's 27, 8, 16, 39, 42, 31. So that was for the objectives and the game and the completing of the games. These are paramount. You need to complete games. Simply just playing them isn't really enough unless they're key to specific objectives. You really do want to complete these. Granted, that's half the name of the game. But also, these objectives are kind of paramount. And this is a race mechanic, so it's not like, oh, everybody gets a prize. No, it's the first person to do it gets it. So there is a little bit of like, oh, well, it sucks to be you type mechanic in here. And the thing with these is that they're worth 8, 9, 10 points apiece. If, like me, in that particular game, 27, 8, 16, if you're able to dominate the objectives, you've probably won the game. And so it really does pigeonhole you into those 2 things. There's a little bit of an illusion of, oh yeah, what do I fancy trying this game? There isn't really a what are you trying this game, it's here's the objectives, do those objectives. And in doing those objectives, you will no doubt do like the rest of the game anyway. So it's a little bit one note, kind of a very narrow street of what you're allowed to do. Certainly something like Pursuit, with obviously more meat and mechanics in it, gives you a lot more variety in that aspect. Component quality is adequate, but not for the price point you're paying, really. This is just basic cardboard tiles. There's not really any major, like great artwork to speak of. I mean, some of these games, I've got funny little names like Dungeon Shredders and, Dragon Scales, District Disorder. There's a little bit of a, whatever gimmick with these, but, this whole, like, funniness with the games is going to die after your first game, basically. But yeah, the artwork's nothing special. It just generates a few of the nostalgia feels. Everything is kind of basic. The tiles are nothing to speak of either. Really, I think most of the money that this game is worth went on these gems. But then these gems are your standard plastic, coloured gems, which you can buy for, as near as makes no difference, little money from Amazon or whatever. I mean, I know it because I've done so for games like Seasons in my collection, where I just bought a bunch of gems. So the fact that this game in the UK is demanding £50 off you, like minimum, seems a bit high. For a light game that's meant to appeal to light gamers, semi-casual gamers, £50? I don't know, that just seems a little bit high for it. I'm not sure you're really getting value for your money here, although Arcane Wonders does tend to have a little bit of a price hike with their games, partially, I suppose, maybe because they're based in the US and it's got to come to the UK, so there might be some import issues on that front, but still, it's a lot to ask. Video Game Champion is going to have a very niche market, I think. If you are not connected to this theme in any way, shape or form, then this game isn't going to work for you. I don't think there's enough mechanically in here to make it interesting enough. You're probably better off playing something like Automania that uses this grid system but does a little bit extra on top, which even if you're not majorly into cars is still a better game in my opinion. I think it definitely beats this one. This one is coasting very heavily on that theme, more so than something like Pursuit is and some other ones, and I do like the theme. I think the theme comes out very well in this, not necessarily every mechanic is a connection, but the aesthetics and like something like the magazine cheat codes and having to get money from your parents, begging them, doing your chores, this is stuff we remember doing as kids. Even getting stuff from the rental store. It's definitely going to spark a conversation piece between you and the other players about what life was like in the 90s or something, depending on how old you are. And, that stuff is fine. But that's only going to last you a game or two. You know, you'll play it once or twice, and then that whole gimmick with the theme will kind of die off, and then what you're left with is a fine game, a smooth game, a decent enough game, but one that maybe outstays its welcome a little bit. There's no solo mode in here, so you are only playing this with 2 to 5 players. I don't think it works as well with 2. I don't think it works with 5 really, so you're looking at 3 to 4. But then you've got to demand a table hog. It's costing £50, and aesthetically it's okay, nothing amazing. It's all right, but there's not enough here to sort of bring me back for multiple games, particularly as it's going to demand that I do whatever these objectives say in order to actually win the game. You cannot ignore these. You must do them, or else you will lose. You try to win this game without completing objectives. It ain't physically possible. So yeah, it's just kind of left me a little bit flat. And seeing people, Dicestar and various other people that, decide, all right, I want to give this like 8, 9 out of 10s, I'm not seeing it. There's a lot of better games in this weight category that I can think of on my shelf alone that I would play over this one. And as I say, it's not bad at all. It's just, it kind of exists. But I think this one's going to get forgotten very quickly. I don't see it being sold much. I don't hear anyone else talk about it. I think it's sort of already come and gone and done its thing. I give it overall a 5 out of 10. It's average. It does the job. And maybe it's closer to a 6. But I suppose I could give it a 6, but only because of the theme connection. I think if you take the theme out of this game, there isn't really much of the game left to make me suddenly go, oh yeah, this is one I necessarily recommend. So it's fine, it's average. Somebody wants to play it, I'll play it. I'll get some enjoyment, I'll get some connection, nostalgia out of it, but once you've played it a few times, you're kind of done. There's not enough variety, there's not enough engagement throughout other than just talking about the theme, which I could do without playing a game. Hell, I could just go and play a game right now. I might go play Baldur's Gate 3 after this, so yeah, it's fine, it exists, but at the end of the day, it's just what it is. So that's it for me on this episode of The Broken Meeple. If you like what you see, then please thumb it up on YouTube and thumb it up on Board Game Geek when it goes live on the page. Don't forget to check out the rest of my content. I am now done with the top 50 games from my collection, so by all means check that one out. It's been doing very well. There's a lot of engagement. Hopefully there'll be some games there that I can rave from the mountaintops about. Well, yeah, there will be. There's 50 of them. But, by all means check them out. Let me know your thoughts on this game if you played it. Do you agree or disagree? Do you love it? Do you think it is coasting on the theme? Or do you actually get a lot from the mechanics as well? Do you think it's overpriced? Do you think it's not aesthetically pleasing? Whatever, let me know your thoughts down below. Until next time, remember, regardless of whether you cheated your way through every game via the use of magazines as a kid, it's still only a game, and I do miss those days, even if this game just gave me a brief connection back to it. So take care, bye for now.